sharing durian ASEAN.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hey, good morning. This is Arlene.
Hi, welcome back. This is Grace.
And of course, yeah, on our very beautiful morning where we bring you all the latest news from Southeast Asia. So we want to start our news with something that is happening in Indonesia.
Sure.
So I want to start with the story of slaves and sheep and fish.
Okay, I'm trying to think how those three words can be related.
So apparently in Indonesia, they recently nabbed ships believed to carry slave-caught fish.
Right. Well, this massive refrigerated cargo ship is believed to be loaded with the slave-caught fish, like you mentioned, and it was seized by Indonesia's Navy, and it is brought to shore, which was just last week Thursday. And then this Thai-owned Silver Sea 2, that's the name, was located late around Wednesday and escorted about 80 miles, that's around 130 kilometers, to naval base in Sabang, which was on the Indonesian's archipelago's northwestern tip.
Well, that's interesting to see that they finally caught something. I mean, I'm really proud of Indonesian Navy to be able to actually seize the slave-caught fish, because I think slavery in the fishing industry in Southeast Asia is definitely quite bad, in fact. It's so good that Fisheries Minister Susi Pujas Tuti said that she was so overwhelmed with happiness, adding that it was difficult to find because the boat's signal had a delay. It was almost impossible, but they did it.
It looks like the security level coming from Indonesia, it's getting stronger and stronger, which is very good news, because Joko Widodo did mention that he will focus more on the marine security system, and then it looks like his words are carried out correctly. And in fact, this Silver Sea 2 is the same 2,285-ton vessel captured in a high-resolution satellite photo last month. It was in Papua New Guinea, showing its hold open, and also two fishing trawlers tethered to each side and loading fish as well.
And in fact, analysts identify the smaller trawler as among those that fled the remote Indonesia island village of Benjina earlier this year. Crew by enslaved men from poor Southeast Asian country, possibly mainly from Myanmar and all that, and routinely being beaten and forced to work nearly non-stop with little or no pay. It is quite. I mean, I'm really proud of Indonesia to be able to finally caught the Silver Sea 2, and this will be one of the, I guess, domino effect where Southeast Asian government and authorities are taking charge to ensure that slavery is stopped, especially to have slave-free seafood. I really want to know where our fishes and our sotong kurita and our prawns and all that, where do they come from? I think it's important for consumers to know that.
It is, and in fact Indonesia's action is very important as it demonstrates the commitment to enforcing the action of vessels within their waters, regardless of whether they are fishing illegally or trafficking labor.
Indonesia's commitment is so good that the recent, I would say, parliamentary address by President Joko Widodo at the Member of Parliament in Jakarta also reminded his colleagues in politics to swipe ego and focus more on economic progress. And I totally agree with him. He called on bureaucrats and politicians during last Friday to set aside every ego that they have. I think he should be advising Malaysian politicians as well.
I totally agree.
And focus more on working together to kickstart economic reforms, especially Southeast Asian is being hit hard with the dropping of yuan.
And at the same time, the way how he approaches the economic growth when it comes to political party. He wants to really make sure that he understands the system first and see what is this root problem here. And in his first State of the Nation address to Parliament, he took a swipe at the bickering within the government agencies as well as the political parties.
Damn it, Malaysia.
Yes, you're right there. Yeah.
It's a common issue among political parties.
Exactly, and they have failed to turn the economic better, and also, of course, they had led to disappointments in investors as well. So, according to him, he said that to overcome the issues this country is currently facing, we have to work shoulder to shoulder. We should not be divided by political or even short-term interest.
That's very hard to say, but for him to actually be able to say that, it shows that he is a visionary leader. He's not just there to take advantage of the Indonesia's economy and his position as the president, but he really want to improve Indonesia's significance throughout the world and maybe in ASEAN as well. He also added that the erosion of a culture of mutual respect and tolerance in official institutions such as law enforcement agency, communities, media and political parties is causing the country to be caught in a web of egos.
Right.
And I totally agree with him. As much as we want to blame the system, I think on the individual level, we should look at ourselves and be more humble in the way we conduct ourselves.
I agree with that. Well, we can't also ignore about the infrastructure. I mean, Indonesia has a very poor infrastructure system, and of course, Joko Widodo has been looking at to improve this specific sector there. And then we can also ignore the rupiah dropping here. So both those major sort of elements when it comes to economic part, the Joko Widodo is looking at the ego and also sort of the proud that he has to, he said that those two elements has to be thrown away when you really want to improve the nation.
And talking about improving the nation, I have to go back to Malaysia with the 1MDB probe. Apparently, Malaysia's central bank has said that it has completed the 1MDB probe.
Oh, well, Malaysia Central Bank it says that the completed investigation into debt-laden 1MDB, which is still up till today, it's very controversial. And then they have submitted a report recommending this appropriate enforcement action to the country's chief prosecutor.
And what is interesting is the central bank said that in June it has launched a formal inquiry into the 1MDB to examine whether there has been any violations. And the bank has submitted in its investigation paper to the Attorney General with the recommendations for the appropriate enforcement action. This is according to the central bank head, which is Tan Sri Zeti Akhtar Aziz. And she said the investigation were completed this week, but the central bank could not discuss details that publicly. 7 central bank officials were also being investigated by the police over the leaked information on the 1MDB.
Well, still 1MDB is quite a bit of an issue when it comes to Malaysia internally, specifically, and then still there are lots of investigations still going on. No matter, well, Prime Minister might have his own sort of approach to this issue, but then the public and agency and perhaps the central bank all together, they are having their own approach to solve or even reveal what's the real truth behind all this.
What is very saddening about the 1MDB case is it has become such a political fiasco that you don't know what is facts, what are the facts, what are the myths, and what is the reality that we are facing right now as Malaysians.
Right.
I think we need to separate between 1MDB, the facts about it and how it actually affected Malaysia, rather than trying to talk about it and make it into a political circus. But at the same time, I think at the end of the day, it's really important. I want to go back to Joko Widodo. It's really important that we put aside our ego, we focus on what is really urgent right now. And what is really urgent right now is our economy is really slumping fast. Ringgit is not getting better.
That's very true.
And oil prices is not getting any higher. So we need to focus on what works in our economy and move on from there.
Yep, for sure.
And talking about moving on, we cannot move on if we have such bad climate. And I'm talking about the haze, by the way. It's totally man-made. It's not I don't want to go to the discussion on climate change, but the haze is definitely a big issue in Southeast Asia, not just China. And fighting haze gets a little hazy in ASEAN, unfortunately.
That's very good way of putting it. Yes, definitely Brunei, Indonesia, and Malaysia and Singapore, as well as Thailand. All those ministers from these countries, they have agreed to remain vigilant and step up effort to minimize this haze problem. And it's not only, these countries, but it affects throughout the Southeast Asia for sure. And the public awareness towards the haze needs to be really highlighted and also be educated in a proper manner. Not just like we see, or even if we have haze problem in Malaysia, not many people are wearing masks even. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the sort of things that we have seen so far. But then from the upper level to public, it is really need to be highlighted, educated, approached in a proper manner that we as whole ASEAN community can prevent and also even protect ourselves from getting sick.
Well, the recent ministerial meeting on transboundary haze pollution in Jakarta, they did raise the issue on haze quite seriously, in fact, with ministers from Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore and Thailand agree to remain vigilant in stepping up efforts to minimize transboundary haze. But, giving promises is one thing, but trying to keep your promise is another thing. Of course, their promise is to achieve the goal of a haze-free region by 2020. It's a huge promise, but whether they have done so far to reduce the amount of haze, I don't think so.
Right.
You can still see, every month at least one day
for a cloudy sky.
You will see the cloud is not that clear.
Yeah.
You cannot see the stars at all.
Well, this, of course, the regional haze issue has been a test of ASEAN's political will. For example, Singapore had pressed ahead and also enacted in September last year the Transboundary Haze Pollution Act, which prosecutes those who involve in its illegal slash and burn activities outside Singapore. And not only from Singapore, when it comes to Indonesia, because of the volcano eruptions, the haze, it contributes to the haze problem.
Well, I have to say kudos to ASEAN because they did have the ASEAN haze monitoring system, which was developed in Singapore.
I see.
In 2012 to enhance the hotspot surveillance. So these are very small but really important achievement towards reducing haze. But there's still a lot of things that needs to be done. So I would say that ASEAN needs to back up.
For sure.
So we'll take a one short break. When we return, we'll discuss more on the economic side of Southeast Asia.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene.
Welcome back, this is Grace.
And of course, you are still with us on our discussion, and this time we move on to the economic side of Southeast Asia. Guess what? Well, I'm not talking about Southeast Asia, I'm talking about China and US.
Oh, right. What's going on?
China has just beat the ass of US in trade volume with ASEAN nations, and I'm not kidding you.
Well, in fact, China has surpassed the US in goods trade, and also ASEAN countries and the trade and in a similar amount of services. Well, on China side, definitely it's a good news. I mean, they have been doing good jobs in the volume of its goods trade with the 10 member from ASEAN region.
I think China has learned a lot throughout the years, throughout the decades, in fact, on how to do business.
Right.
They used to be just another manufacturing country, manufacturing mediocre goods, but now I think China has looked beyond just manufacturing. They have developed quite a host of R&D platforms, and they are now looking at becoming the global player in terms of trying to produce the best economic product or services or even management focus. But what I think China has done really well is trying to capture the ASEAN market, and that is why ASEAN has constantly look at China as its greater
sure.
partner than the US.
Well, we keep repeating this, but there are 10 ASEAN nations from Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Myanmar, Vietnam, Cambodia, Brunei, Thailand, and Laos, and of course the Philippines. This whole the combined population is 600 millions, and definitely China has seen the potential when it comes to economic growth. And this fastest economic growth that China has been seeing, definitely the China has been paying its sort of effort right now. And just to give a little bit of fact is that in 2011, the US and China each traded about $37 billion in services with ASEAN countries. But from 2007 through 2012, US foreign direct investments flows to ASEAN countries of which is $96 billion. But that during those period that exceeded the China's reports around $23 billion.
And look what we have now.
But from 2009, you're right, until last year, China actually existed the US investment flows.
Oh.
And that's very great news. And definitely in the financing, the China's the power here has been sort of overpowered the US power at the moment.
And what is even more interesting is in 2014, China's total good trades towards ASEAN is 480 billion, and more than twice what the US total goods trade to ASEAN of 220 billion US dollar. I mean twice.
That's
twice
really
as much traded goods between ASEAN and China compared to US and ASEAN.
It looks like, well, when we think of the gigantic countries, we think of China, US, and India. But then when it comes to economical sort of competition, I will say, between US and China, it's always been a sort of on the same par. But then now that we found out about China that sort of surpassed the US power, it's amazing that how they have been doing their job.
Yep. But also reliance too much on China would cause a lot of problem to ASEAN. I think the recent problem of China's 3-day of only devaluating yuan have caused a lot of headache to a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, especially Malaysia, Singapore, and other countries, Indonesia as well. So they are actually, interestingly, ASEAN is calling for ASEAN currency peg to gain impetus.
Well, the ringgit value, as we all know, it's been dropping really drastically. And when we compare to US dollars, Singaporean dollars, now we have to multiple by 4, and the Singapore dollar is almost 3, which is really, we have to grab our brains, and also our pockets, make sure that we don't spend that much. Well, while these currency traders have taken this Malaysian central bank stand, the other ASEAN economies are also feeling the pressure, like you mentioned, and especially Indonesia and Singapore. And having the Singaporean dollars sort of shaking because of the China, the yuan currency, it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And because the ringgit value has dropped so much, there's a call to actually to make sure that ASEAN have somehow followed the footsteps of Tun Mahathir at that time during the 1998 crisis of pegging the ASEAN currency. So among the idea mooted is an ASEAN currency peg where all 10 member nations fix an exchange rate against each other and create a basket index, which is then used as a reference against the US dollar. Such an idea has gained significant momentum in recent days because over half of the external trade for the 10 member nations are actually conducted with ASEAN. So we have actually quite a growing number of intra-ASEAN trade. Having some stability in currency exchanges could result in a more intra-ASEAN trade, like I mentioned earlier, and further boost the move towards the AEC, which are going to kick off next year.
Well, AEC is another story here. Well, but of course we cannot ignore the currency status in each country in Southeast Asia. So having this ASEAN currency peg will also help insulate the region from uncertainties involving China's economy, which has already roiled the markets in recent weeks with the sharp plunges in stock market values and also yuan devaluation.
And of course, the ASEAN currency peg also avoids some of the hurdles which have prevented all the 10 countries in Southeast Asia from adopting a common currency like the EU, because monetary control remains within each country. And I totally agree. I think what's the difference between EU and ASEAN is we might not want to have a common currency. We are still proud of our currency. I mean, each of us, especially if our currency is as high as Singapore, I think.
For sure, yes.
I don't think Singapore wants an ASEAN currency when Sing dollar is such a valuable is in high demand.
So, having this oldest project, and especially AEC, is to achieve the single market. But then also having proud with our own currencies is also very important at this point.
On the other hand, besides talking about currency and business and economy, we need to talk about floods. Apparently, floods has hit a lot of the rice crop in Myanmar, and unfortunately, it is halting Myanmar's rice exports.
For sure. And then Myanmar has been exporting the rice from the agriculture side, of course. But because of flood, it sort of disturbed the supply from Myanmar to other countries. So the Myanmar Rice Federation voluntarily suspended exports to prevent an increase in prices after more than 200,000 acres, about that's 81,000 hectares of paddy fields were damaged by floods. So this is a huge damage in the nation, and then in fact that sort of disturbed and affected whole the agriculture part.
According to one senior economist, that a downward production revision might be warranted, and this is according to Concepcion Kalps, senior economist at the Rome-based FAO, Food and Agriculture. And we still have to understand the true scale of the inundations to see whether they would dent the overall outlook.
Right.
So more than 1.2 million acres of farmland have been flooded. Unfortunately, more than 1 million people have been affected by the flood, and the situation is so critical that the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reported, citing the Ministry of Agriculture and Irrigation, that the loss of stored food and livestock coupled with internal trade destruction may see food security in affected areas deteriorate. This is really damaging, because food security is a huge problem if we do not really focus on it.
That's correct. And then the nation Myanmar will probably miss its export target of 1.5 million tons in the year through March next year, 2016. And this is according to the Rice Federation. Wind and milled production is forecast to increase 1.6% to 12.8 million tons in the 2015 and 16. So basically the agency estimates that exports may climb 18% to 2 million tons in 2015.
Wow. So while Myanmar is losing its rice, Brunei is losing its oil money. And unfortunately, instead of working on solving the problem, an autocratic sultanate turns to more devotion as oil money declines.
Well, this is very lazily interesting. Yeah.
People become more religious when economy is not doing well, seems like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this sort of annual event in the conjunction with the Ramadan is the chance for Bruneians and to praise the Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah, one of the world's richest men, also few remaining absolute monarchs. And they will have another chance on August 15th, which just passed away, and when he marks the 69th birthday.
So I don't know what to say, but the bountiful oil have made Bruneians, of course, one of the wealthiest in Southeast Asia. But they are not doing really well in trying to preserve their wealth. Instead, they just become complacent. And so they rely too much on it, I guess.
A religion, right?
And then they focus on religion instead of trying to work on their problem, and this will definitely give a long-term negative effect to Brunei if they just pray and not work.
Well, there are also simpler theory where the Sultan or all these Brunei's royals, they have grown more religious than ever before. And because of that, perhaps the mentality in Brunei, it's growing somewhere else rather than focusing on purely on the economic growth.
That's why they have Sharia law and it's become more stricter. And what is worse is the Sultan is taking an even more dogmatic line on how Brunei's religious heritage is to be considered. This is something that is worrisome.
Very.
Yeah.
And then, eventually they have to say, you don't need to work, but to pray.
And the worst thing is they focus on, they try to crack down on minority faith. For example, crack down on Christmas and New Year's celebration. Which I don't understand why. Anyway, we'll take a short break. When we return, we'll discuss more on the social culture side of Southeast Asia.
ASEAN Dailies. First and foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene.
Welcome back, this is Grace.
And of course, you are at our social culture side of Southeast Asia where we discuss in our ASEAN Daily. I want to ask you, Grace, can you speak Mandarin?
I was about to ask you the same thing because I've heard you speaking Mandarin before, and I wanted to ask you how hard it is to speak Mandarin.
Well, it's really hard.
It is really hard, the language. Yeah?
But because I learned it since primary school, so or even kindergarten, so I didn't really feel it was that hard.
Right.
But I think for someone who learned it not during their early time, when they were younger, it can be really challenging,
right? Yeah. And in fact, guess who is gonna learn Mandarin?
Are you talking about Africans?
Well, it's obvious, isn't it? So in fact, South African, the schools will introduce Mandarin lessons next year.
That is super awesome.
You know what the scary thing is? China is growing really, really fast.
It is.
With this, other parts of the world, they're realizing the importance of learning Mandarin.
A lot of people might not realize Chinese expansionism is actually being felt the most, not just in Southeast Asia, but also in Africa.
Exactly.
More Africans are looking at the Chinese as something that is awesome.
It is very.
And that's why they want to learn Mandarin, because it goes back to it will develop their economy in a way. I think they see China as the emerging, or maybe it's already like one of the greatest economic power in the world.
Yes, because of that, this will be planned for 10 years, and then it is also that 10-year plan was signed by South African President Jacob Zuma, and then it was just last year, and then now they want to execute this plan, and by introducing it to schools. And there are teachers who travel to China for training as well.
Yay.
And also they will bring trainers into the country to support the system, which they sound very ambitious, and also it looks like they were really introducing the importance of learning Chinese language.
In fact, the rollout of Mandarin will see China training hundreds of South African teachers and building 3 Confucius Institutes, research centers similar to Germany's Goethe Institute, designed to promote Chinese culture.
Wow, that's very interesting. Yeah. And in fact, there are a number of South Africans, they live in China.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then it's very interesting to have to see the intermarriage between South Africans and the Chinese there. And in 2009, in fact, China became South Africa's largest trading partner.
Wow. And the weirdest thing, and not in a bad way, but in an actually good way, was there's this one guy, he was in China in 2004, and guess what? Chinese school were already teaching Swahili and Zulu. Can you imagine a Chinese person speaking Swahili?
That's very amazing, in fact. So South Africa has 11 official languages, and then they will be implementing the Chinese language program in their own countries.
Of course, there are people who reject the introduction of Chinese language. I think it's quite common, especially when you have such a strong nationalism. I mean, some people might have, and this is according to the South Africa Democratic Teachers Union, who said that it was tantamount to a new form of colonization by the Chinese. I don't know. I would learn Mandarin.
For sure, yes.
I mean, it's just a language.
It is language for sure, but I tried learning. It's very hard.
Well, talking about colonization, I would say Yuna has definitely colonized the Western world with her style of, hijab wearing, music. I really love her music. And the great thing is, she's coming to Malaysia this October.
And then she is, in fact, the Malaysians' sort of pride when it comes to music industry. And having Yuna back to our Malaysia, of course, she will draw a lot of attention and also attractions among her fans and friends, of course. And this, by returning to Malaysia, she will share a lot of her new tunes, as well as her concert will be held in KLCC. And this is organized by the Livescape.
On the 16th of October?
That's correct. And then she has this unique characteristic when it comes to her genre, which is contemporary pop, and also acoustic folk and a soulful R&B. And of course, she started as a singer-songwriter.
I love her music, so I might catch up on her. Who knows? And for those that really want to buy the tickets, you can buy on August 13. It will go on sale, which is already a couple of days ago. And you can go to ticketpro.com.my. And on the other hand, talking about animals, well, last couple of weeks we focused a lot on lions.
This is lions.
Still the lions, of course. But a lot of people did not realize, but rhino horns and elephant tusks, they are quite a commodity, or is quite a hot seller in Vietnam, and they have been seized in Vietnam by the Vietnamese authorities.
And this is very disturbing because they seized more than 700 kilograms of these horns and then elephant tusks. And this whole of these prized animal parts was discovered hidden in 2 containers on the board, carrying ground stones at the central port of Da Nang, which was just last week. And of course, all these Asian I will say people from Asian countries, they really focus on hunting these animals, and they're at the danger level of disappearing their own species.
I would say we need more awareness on trying to preserve endangered animal and not to kill it for for reason like this. I really don't understand. But unfortunately, trade of endangered animal has flourished in recent years, particularly to the demands from Vietnam and China, with devastating results for Africa's rhino populations.
And the rhino population is just getting lesser and lesser because of this all activities going on. And this is something that even our Dream ASEAN listeners need to be really aware of, and then try to come up with the sort of the awareness to bring to tell your friends and families about this all activities.
To save the rhino. And I just want to say
as well.
I want to say that back in 2011, the western black rhinoceros, a subspecies, was last seen in Cameroon, and is already declared extinct. And we do not want to have all the rhino species go extinct. So save the rhino. Well, that's all from us today. You can always listen to us on our podcast on YouTube, or listen to us live right now at drenasen.com.
As well as we have our social media channels, Facebook, Arlene mentioned about YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. And when you're on the go, download our application on your mobile phone called Drenasen.